Hello guys, welcome to the pod. Don't you dare edit that out. Welcome to the Eat Like Ruby pod. I feel like I always say welcome back. I say podcast. I'm going to abbreviate it more and more every week. Let's get into it. I feel like I'm getting so many consistent weekly OG listeners. It's really cool. If you guys follow me on Instagram, if you do not, first of all, eat_like_Ruby. But if you do, you guys would have seen the other week, the girls at the podcast studio celebrated 27,000 downloads. Did I say that right? 27,000, yes. Of the Eat Like Ruby podcast, which is crazy. And I think we were up to about episode 27 at that time, which is really cool because it's like 1,000 downloads an app or whatever. But the thing with downloads, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, is that's not listens, is it? Like that's people that actually hit download. So people could listen and never download and you don't really know.
Yeah, they don't always download it, so listens are higher.
Yeah, so there could be, I'd say the listens are probably at 1 million then, really. Yeah, do the math, do the ratio on that one. No, but that's so cool. It's so awesome. I had no idea what was going on at the podcast studio. They were just playing music and popping streamers and I was like, I don't know what's happening here. But the girls are saying that's really cool. That's really exciting. I have no idea what are like good downloads or bad downloads, but I feel like 27,000 sounds like a lot. So we'll see. That is a good thing. And it's just really cool. It was really exciting. And I'm honestly just so grateful for everybody that listens. I get lots of Instagram messages about it. I try to keep up with the messages. If you send Instagram messages, I do try and keep up with them, but I do appreciate it. I love it. So thanks guys. And if you are brand new to the podcast today, welcome for the first time. So I'm back today with a solo episode. The last 2 episodes have been with Shaq. So if you haven't listened to those or you don't know what I'm talking about, my partner Shaq, he was on the last 2 episodes. Not last week, but the week before, we did the episode with his personal story with nutrition and training and playing sport, body composition, mindset. There were so many things. And I just think that was such a cool episode. I was really like in awe of him for just opening up the way he did and like telling us his story and sharing his experience. I think that was so cool. And I think for some people, you know, we look at someone like Shaq, if you've actually seen him, he's obviously huge, he's tall, big guy, tattoos. Like I think a lot of people would think that they couldn't relate to him in terms of training or nutrition or whatever. And I think when he opened up and told his story, there'd obviously been so many ups and downs. And while they might not be the same ups and downs that women have or that we have, that I have, whatever, I think there was still a lot of relatability to him just going through ups and downs in life in general and having, or I don't want to say using food, but having ups and downs with his food and his body composition as a result of that. So if you kind of saw those episodes and thought, you know, I probably can't relate to that, I would go back and listen if you didn't listen for that reason, because I think there was a lot more relatability than people might think. So I was honestly so stoked on him for coming in and doing that. And then last week we did another episode with Shaq where we had a very exciting announcement. If you haven't listened to that episode, I'm not going to tell you what it was. So you're going to have to go back and listen and download. But we did have a very exciting announcement last week, which is very cool. And then, like I said, I'm here today flying solo, and I'm going to talk today about fat loss, which is exciting. I feel like a lot of people's ears would have just pricked up because I spend a lot of time talking about not pursuing fat loss. So I think it's always interesting for people when we pivot the convo and talk about it a little bit. The reason I'm going to talk about this today is because with last week's announcement, you guys would know that I've pivoted my 2023 goals a little bit to pursue some fat loss at some points. I am also running a program in Eat Like Ruby called the Fat Loss Phase. So it seems like a great time to really speak a little bit more about fat loss. Today I'm going to talk about the fat loss phase as in the program, but more so like why I want to run this program, who it's for, why I want to run it at this time of year, the things that I think people should be thinking about right now if they do want to pursue fat loss, whether you're thinking of joining that program or not, wherever you fall. If your ears did prick up when I said the word fat loss, I feel like today's episode will be really beneficial to just get the wheels turning And one thing I think, not to toot my own horn, but one thing I think I do very well is kind of provoke some different thoughts with people. I think a lot of people have been stuck in the same routines or the same cycles, whether they're good or bad, for years. And for a lot of people, as we come into summer, people can start to be quite frantic, like, shit, fuck, I want to pursue fat loss. And it's quite a hectic thing. So I almost want to be ahead of the curve in that sense, where if that would have been you, I want to bring up some things today where you can think about them and have a bit more awareness and a bit more understanding, a bit more education, and maybe switch up that cycle or switch up that mentality a little bit as we head into summer and before we go into that time of year or before that cycle would kick in for you. So the first thing I want to speak about, and we've spoken about this in so many ways before on the podcast, and I've spoken about this to Girls in Eat Like Ruby for years, but that kind of backs up my point, is why we want to be looking at a fat loss phase now. I have coached so many women through fat loss, and it's predominantly around this time of year. And if we really think about it, if you guys are long-term listeners and you've really pieced together everything I've spoken about over this year, we know that typical cycles and typical routines tend to play out. And obviously it's going to be different from person to person depending on what you've got on. But for a lot of people, we might have spent winter doing a gaining phase. We might not have, depending on where you sit with that. For a lot of people, we hit a point towards the end of the year where it's very hard to stick to a diet or stick to a strict fat loss phase or anything because of festivities and holidays and occasions and events and all those things. And if we sort of reverse engineer backwards from there, a good fat loss phase would take anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks, give or take. Let's say we've got like 20 weeks left of the year. If the last 4, 5, maybe even 6 of them are very busy and very hectic with the festive season, by default, we've really probably got anywhere from 10 to 15 weeks left to pursue a successful fat loss phase, if that is your goal. And that's why I want to bring it up now, and that's why I want to run the fat loss phase, which is running from end of August through September, October, through to about middle of November-ish. Very intentionally for this reason, like I said. And one thing we've spoken about on the podcast before, I won't spend too much time on it, is that people look at this goal, this fat loss goal, in November and December. They get quite stressed, they get quite frantic, they try and do something quite dramatic, but they also find themselves at a time of year where there's a lot of events, a lot of occasions, a lot of parties, and it's quite a shit fight when we think about it, where trying to do something that needs to be quite strict and need a lot of adherence and consistency. We've got an event on every second or third day that messes with our ability to be adherent and be consistent. It just doesn't work. But this is why I tend to find myself for the last 10 years coaching women on fat loss now, because we bring all this to their attention. We think, what have you got on? What's the goal? When's the best time to implement this phase? For a lot of people, it is through possibly July, August, September, October, maybe November, depending on the individual, but it just makes a lot of sense. So when we think about a program called the fat loss phase, obviously it is designed for people who want to pursue fat loss. Funny that. But when we look at a fat loss goal, that can literally be anything from 3 or 4 kilos up to 30 kilos. Like there's no, or more. There's no right or wrong with that. And I think we see people that do have a large amount of weight to lose think like, oh, I couldn't do that program because there's people in it that don't have much weight to lose. Like, would I be the, air quote, odd one out? Absolutely not. And then I think vice versa, people that don't have much weight to lose can feel a little bit of resistance where people are like, why would you do the fat loss phase? Like you don't have much fat to lose. But I think, like I said, there's no right or wrong with that. If somebody does have a larger amount of weight to lose and they're motivated and they're keen to do that, that's fucking awesome. So I'm never going to shame that. And on the flip side, if someone doesn't have much to lose, they're quite, like to an extent, they're on top of their nutrition and training already. If someone's in that position, maybe they've done a gaining phase, maybe they've just had a relaxed winter, whatever it is, maybe they've just been like chilling with their nutrition and training for a while, but they want to ramp it up and just tighten things up, that's fucking awesome as well. So I always want to point that out, that, like I said, there's no right or wrong with that. And wherever you fall on that scale, not the actual scale, but on that scale, if you want to pursue fat loss from a positive place, you're motivated, you're excited, and the underlying thing there is that you want to improve yourself, whether it's body composition, physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, I'm all for that. I'm going to applaud that, and I want you in the fat loss phase. So I always want to point that out. You're never going to be the odd one out in something like this if you don't have much to lose or you feel like you've got a lot to lose. The other thing I want to speak to here is like, who would a program like this be for? And like I said at the start of the episode, whether you actually want to join the like Ruby fat loss phase or you're just someone that's pursuing any form of fat loss phase, there's a few things I want to speak about here. First of all, if you are someone who doesn't truly know how to pursue a successful fat loss phase, so maybe you've dabbled in diet, you've had a bit of success, but you've undone it quite quickly, or you haven't been able to maintain things, and you just feel still like quite lost, or you haven't found like the thing, you don't have real confidence of how to successfully pull this off without sort of being a little bit scared or thinking like, I hope this works, or I need to hunt for the diet that's going to work. So if you're someone that's still just got a bit of doubt, some uncertainty of how to truly achieve fat loss, I think, like I've said on so many podcasts before, I think it is a no-brainer to join something or hire someone or invest in someone or something to an extent that you do feel like you know how to do those things. I think that is an absolute game changer. I've spoken about this so much, so I'll try not to get too far into that. But when somebody is in that headspace of feeling like, I wish I knew how to do this, or hopefully I can achieve this, but they don't actually know whether they can, and it is relying on like wishing and hoping, I think that's so shitty, because I think I said it in last week's episode. I know how to achieve fat loss. Like, I've studied this shit, I've coached this shit for years. So when I see people with that level of hesitation and almost like negativity and fear around it, I'm like, no, you do not have to have that, because we actually know how to do this. So I think if you're wanting to achieve fat loss with the back half of this year and you've got that level of uncertainty, I would look at joining something to remove the uncertainty. And the other person that I want to speak to here, and I think there's a little bit more to be said for this one, is the people who feel like they do know how to achieve fat loss. So maybe you've been in Eat Like Ruby, or maybe you've had a coach, you've had some level of education, whatever it is. And you're like, no, like I understand nutrition, I understand calories, I know I've got to be in a deficit, I know what my deficit is kind of. In terms of the actual facts, you're pretty good. Like, you don't have a lot of questions, you don't have a lot of uncertainty. First of all, I think that's awesome. If somebody has gotten to that point, that's wicked. I'm all for that. But, and this is a big but, because I see this all the time. Often when we're in that position, we can then think like, I've got the education, I know what I'm doing, I can do this by myself. Some people can, and applause to them. If you've done this on your own, that is awesome. I applaud that very much, because it is definitely easier said than done. So what I tend to see become a bit of an issue here, and I want to preface this by saying, if you can relate to this, you are so not alone. Even actual educated people like myself, and I am speaking from experience here, can still struggle with this thing. So if you hear what I say here and you think, oh, yep, shit, attacked, just know you are so not alone. This is so much more common than people think. What I'm talking about here is a person that, like I said, thinks they know how to pursue fat loss, and they actually do know, when we look at the facts, they know what they're doing, goes into a fat loss phase, and very quickly emotion kicks in and outweighs all of the facts and all of the education and everything we thought we knew. And what I'm talking about here is, let's say a person does know all of those things and they line up their own fat loss phase and they think, just as an example, like, yep, I know my effective calorie deficit is 1,600 calories. Let's just say, for example. So a person is like, yep, I'm going to start my fat loss phase Monday, 1,600 calories, let's go. Let's just say, for example, this person weighs 65 kilos. You guys probably like, is she talking about herself? But a lot of these numbers are similar to my numbers. But let's just say 65 kg. I know I could probably drop weight on 1,600 calories. Monday, day one, let's go. Hits 1,600 calories, goes to gym, does all the things, whatever. Maybe weighs in the next day, 64.9. Okay, cool. Yep, awesome. nails 1600 calories that day, ticks all the boxes, weighs in the next day 64.8. Okay, yeah, cool, awesome, nails it again, wakes up the next day, weighs in at 65.6. So often, this can trigger the spiral of, fuck this, fuck the scale, fuck my calories, I'm over it, I hate this, I've busted my ass for 3 days. Like, this can become the biggest emotional spiral. And like I said, I can speak from experience with myself. I can speak from experience coaching hundreds of women through this phase. This is so common, and to an extent, it's normal. So again, do not shame yourself, but I feel like there are women everywhere nodding their heads right now like, yep, can relate. And this is so common, guys. And what can happen here, as funny as it sounds, a person in that position can get very dramatic because of that emotional reactive response so quickly. So if we think about that, we've dieted for 3 days. It's 72 hours. Like, it's 3 days. And people will, like I said, let that emotion kick in and very quickly be like, shit, do I need to change the plan? Do I need to change my calories? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? And it's quite a spiral very quickly. And what can happen there? Let's say, for example, a person in that position is like, yep, fuck it, it's not working. I'm going to go to 1400 calories, right? Which we just know, like, I'll come back and explain this scenario, but I really want to tap into the process at the time. Let's say on that Thursday, the person then is hitting 1400 calories now instead of 1600, weighs in the next day, we're still 65.6. Again, very angry, very emotional. Why isn't it working? Nothing's working, questioning everything, throwing the scales off the balcony, big tantrum, like very emotional, reactive response. What tends to then happen there is we get to the weekend and people find themselves in two minds. And this is a person with education, with knowledge, with previous successful dieting history, but emotion is overruling all of those things right now. Usually by the weekend, that person is in a position, let's say they've dieted for the 5 days, a whole 5 days, and they're still, air quotes, like they're weighing the same. So in air quotes, they're like, I'm standing still, like I'm still maintaining, nothing's moving. People then find themselves on the weekend in this position of like, well, I've busted my ass and I've been grinding all week. I should just be able to like go out for tea. Or it's like, I've busted my ass, it hasn't worked, fuck it, I'm going out for tea, right? And they'll go out for this meal. Maybe it's a blowout, maybe it's not, they spiral, whatever. Like, everything is very emotionally driven at this point. What can happen here? The actual worst thing that can happen here is a person can do that, think, fuck it, nothing's working, I'm just going to go out, I deserve it. We see this a lot. I've been grinding for 5 days, I, air quotes, deserve this. Go out, eat way more than we planned, it's a bit of a blowout, whatever happens. Wake up the next day and we've lost a kilo. And then people are in this position of like, well, I grinded for 5 days and nothing fucking happened. Then I went out and pigged out and I lost a kilo. I have no idea what to do next. This is so common, guys. Or I don't even know what's worse. We go out and we do that and we lose a kilo, so we have no idea what to do next. Or we go out, we do that, we put on a kilo, and then people are like, shit, now I'm actually behind where I started. Even though I spent like 5 or 6 days really grinding and working hard, and again, not knowing what to do from there. Do I drop calories? Do I not? No matter how that week has played out for you, if things have dropped and they've spiked, you've blown out, you haven't, whatever, we're so emotionally driven, most people at this point, where we're not relying on that education and the facts and the science and the logic. We're very much like, shit, should I drop food? Should I increase food? Should I drop steps? Should I not? We're not making like logical assessments. We're really chopping and changing. And what can happen here, if we think about so many things I've spoken about on the podcast before, often, and I feel like, again, a lot of people are going to be nodding like, yep, that's me. Often people can go into quite a dramatic deficit and fat loss phase, go through some of those processes that I just said, some of them good, some of them bad, whatever, feel very reactive and not sure what to do next, and then be like, you know what, fuck it, like I'm going to go back to maintenance, because they just feel like nothing's working, I'm maintaining anyway, whatever. Often then people can sit at maintenance for a few days, they might cool down, their emotions might calm down, And then they're like, yeah, no, you know what? Fuck it. I did have a fat loss goal. I'm going back to my deficit. And then they go through that process again, and then they maybe go to maintenance again, and then they go back and they go back and they go back. And then we step back and we look back over 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever. And we have chopped and changed. We have made emotional decisions all the way along. We've gone in and out of deficits, and we haven't done anything consistent enough for it to be successful. And like I said, if you're nodding, just know that you are not alone. We see this all the time. And this is where I think a lot of people can think like, I don't need a coach, or I don't need a program. I don't need to join anything. I can do this myself because I've got the information. The information is great. We all know I am all for people having the education and the information. Having the ability to apply that information and sit with it and not make emotionally driven decisions when shit doesn't go your way is a whole nother story. And that scenario that I just explained, that's just one of the many. When we think about it, if you're someone that has attempted a fat loss phase, whether it was really positive or it was negative, I'm sure you can relate to some aspect of that, whether it's like one day where weight goes up and we question everything, whether it's a week of grinding, so then we think like, should I go out for tea and just blow out? Like, you might have done all those things, you might have done some of them, but there's usually so many little things that come up where, like I said, we are in that position of thinking, I've got all the information, I've got all the education, but having so many individual things pop up daily and not knowing what's going to pop up daily makes it hard to just logically apply that information and that education. And one of the most beneficial things, I think, well, actually, there's probably two. There's actually probably heaps, but I'll speak about two. Two of the most beneficial things that I think people experience from being in a program like this is, first of all, the collective energy is the same. And that's why I like to run programs. Like, obviously we run programs in Eat Like Ruby where you can pursue any goal, but I think it's really cool to niche in a little bit. During winter, we ran Train Like Queens, and this is actually a perfect example. So with Train Like Queens, it was actually the opposite, where everyone's goal was either like maintenance or muscle gain, and it was intentionally getting out of the deficit for the winter. And this is a perfect example of what I want to speak to. Everybody in that group is working towards a similar goal, so therefore experiencing similar things. And such a perfect example of this, I'm going to use my own mum who was on the podcast recently. She ended up coming into Train Like Queens to pursue muscle gain. She came into the group the other day and just said, like, straight up, guys, I've been feeling awesome. I'm pursuing gains. It's awesome, whatever. Today I feel fat. Straight up, I just feel fat. And what happens there is you instantly get a bunch of people that are like, yep, same, I've been there, that was me last week, yep, I know that feeling, whatever. And you're very quickly supported and reminded that you're not alone. So that's one big benefit. But I think the other benefit is, when I've said before on the podcast, like, when we get free programs or free meal plans or free help or whatever, like, that can be awesome to an extent. But when we've actually stepped up and joined something or signed up to something and made a commitment, whether it's like the financial thing that drives you, or it's just the fact that maybe you've signed up to something and you're telling everybody, I've joined this thing, whatever. But when you've actually crossed the line and really put some skin in the game, there's a level of accountability. And I hate talking about accountability in terms of people sort of relying on a coach or a program being like, I'm not motivated. I need you to remind me why I should do this. I don't think we should seek accountability in that way, but I think accountability can be really cool in that, like I said, you have put skin in the game. So when you do have, an air quote, bad day or an off day or whatever, you're not going to pivot as quickly. If we think about that scenario I said before, where a person's maybe pursuing fat loss and then things aren't going their way, so they pivot very quickly, like, fuck it, I'm going to go to maintenance or whatever. If you've actually made a commitment and an investment in some way to your goal, when you're in that moment of thinking like, should I just throw in the towel? You've got more on the line. You're like, well, actually no, because I have committed to this. I have invested to this. I am in a group of people who are doing the same thing. Like, if I just do a 180 and get the hell out of here, you're going to lose something, whether it's, like I said, the financial investment or just the commitment that you've made, or being like, shit, people are going to see me do a runner, whatever it is, I think it just makes us stop and question things a little bit more. And I think that that's so important, because when we join something or when we decide to work towards something, we obviously want that thing to an extent. And then, like we're saying, emotions can kick in or things can happen at the time, and it can make us question that thing. And we've all been there. You want to do something and it's awesome and it's exciting, but it's a bit of a challenge. As soon as you're presented with a challenge, you're like, should I just pull the pin? Fuck it. If you don't lose anything by pulling the pin, it's easier to do so. If you are going to lose something by pulling the pin, you're going to be forced to sit in that a little bit longer and be like, actually, you know what was my end goal? What is the bigger picture here? Am I just having a moment? Do I need to just go through this discomfort and process this moment and remember why I wanted to do this thing in the first place? If we're not, I don't want to say like forced to sit in that, but for lack of a better word, like if we're not forced to sit in that, we can just pivot back and forth so quickly, because why not? Oh, I feel like maintenance today. Oh, I feel like fat loss today. Oh, I feel like pizza today. Like whatever it is, you're not having anything to lose. And that's where we even see people like so often like starting again. If you sign up to something or you join something for 12 weeks or however long, you're not going to let yourself as easily fall into that cycle of like starting again, because you're like, well, fuck, I've got 12 weeks to soak up this thing, make the most of this thing, and ride this 12-week journey with everyone else and really utilize the space as best I can. So I'm not going to fuck with that. And I feel like I'm probably a little bit all over the place today and like jumping from one thing to the next. But the main thing I want to get across with this podcast is to really bring awareness to the things that I see becoming an issue when people are pursuing fat loss. So whether they are a beginner or whether they are experienced, I've seen all those things I just said play out so often, and that's why I want to bring them up right now. Have people really tap in and think, what of those apply to me? And if some of them do apply to me and I do have a history of some of those things, what has to change for me to have a successful fat loss phase this year if I want to have one? And the other thing to look at here is people can leave this too late and join something quite dramatic. And when I say dramatic, I just mean like restrictive. So if people join, like a 6-week challenge or an 8-week challenge or whatever, often we see these running through, I see them so often through like back end of October through to early December. Like I said at the start of the episode, that can actually be a time where it's very hard for people to stick to something strictly. But also the thing we want to look at there is 6 weeks is not a lot of time, especially if we need to allow for some element of trial and error. And people don't want to hear that, because people want to just jump into something and get a result very quickly. Like I said, people are throwing the scales off the balcony on day 4 if they're not seeing what they want. So when we can mention trial and error, some people are like, no, fuck that, I want a result right now. And this is why we tend to see things that are restrictive and dramatic this time of year, because these businesses or these companies or these programs, whatever they are that run these things, know that. They know that like in a 6-week window, we don't have a lot of time. So it has to be intense for it to be effective. And people might think that's great. Like, oh, I signed up to this 6-week thing and I lost a kilo a week for 6 weeks. Awesome. But I feel like so many people are going to be able to relate to this, or at least know someone that they've watched go through this process where it has to be intense. It has to be restrictive. It has to be dramatic. So it's not sustainable. And what can happen is, so whether it's some dramatic diet or we're training like a crazy amount of hours per week, we're training just to get that like quick, intense result. What happens here, or what happens often here, is people come out of those programs, like we said, first or second week of December, and go straight into the festive season. If you go from a restrictive thing that you've done for 6 weeks where you can't eat carbs and you're not allowed to eat pasta and you've got to go to gym twice a day and you don't drink any alcohol, and it's all of these crazy things, and then you do that for 6 weeks, and then in week 7, the challenge is over, everything's over, you're in the thick of the festive season, cue the bread, the pasta, the chocolate, the alcohol, all these things. Of course, you're going to very quickly undo the result. And I mean, I could talk all day about this because we undo the physical progress, but mentally and emotionally, we're stuck in that spiral where it's like, well, I've just spent the last 6 weeks thinking that doing all these things is wrong. I'm now in a position where I've got a fucking event on every single day that I can't really avoid doing these things. Any single time I do them, I think I'm wrong, I'm being bad. And it's just the craziest mentality that can kick in here. And we see this so often where someone might get a result in that 6 weeks, and then in the next 3 weeks being the lead up to Christmas, physically that goes away very quickly. Mentally and emotionally, they spiral very quickly. By sort of Christmas, New Year, they're just feeling absolutely freaking terrible, and then they're looking to do something similar in January. But we will talk about that in January. Coming back to my original point, this is A, why I like people to think about it now, and B, why I like to look at something like a 12-week program at least. Like I said, depending on how much weight there is to lose, I would say a successful fat loss phase is anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks. Obviously, if a person has a large amount of weight to lose, they might need more than 16 weeks, but that's where I would be looking at having a diet break, having a maintenance break, whatever. Like, that's quite a different topic, and it's actually a topic I'm going to cover in the fat loss phase. So if you want to know more about that, there's your cue to join. But we want to sort of tee up at least that time frame. And the reason I say that is it can take time to find an effective deficit for a person. We can do all the calculations in the world, but we don't know every single minute thing that's going to make up you and your metabolism and your energy output and your energy intake and all of these things. And like I said before, some people can really hate that because they want that result straight away. The thing I love to point out here is, let's say we do the calculations and we say, okay, yeah, this is what we think is going to be an effective calorie deficit for you to start achieving fat loss. If you nail that for 4 weeks and you don't see the progress and the result that you want, people can see that as a very shitty thing, right? And I have so much to say about this. People can look at that and go, well, I've done every single thing possible. I've busted my ass for 4 weeks and it didn't work, is the underlying thing there. What I always want to point out to people here is if you are nailing shit, like if you're nailing nutrition, you're nailing training, whatever, you're ticking all the boxes and you're doing your bit, nothing is a waste of time. Because if we think about that, let's just say, for example, we calculate your deficit to be 2,000 calories. You nail that 2,000 calories every day for 4 weeks, and you nail your training and your steps and all of the things, and we don't see the result that we thought we would. That is so informative, and that is literally invaluable feedback, because we can look at that and say nearly 100% for a fact, we know that that is not an effective deficit for you. Therefore, we know we need to adjust that to get the result that you want. When we do that, we usually then see a response very quickly. If we know that 2,000, like if we calculated 2,000, to be your deficit, you've nailed that for 4 weeks, it hasn't worked the way we thought. Usually very quickly, like we might move to 1,800 calories, let's just say, for example. Usually we then see things move so quickly. You've had 4 weeks of building good habits, building good routine, building good structure. You take that and you add a further 200 calorie deficit on your day. Some people may or may not know this. If we think about calculating our nutrition targets, if we have missed the mark, like I said, there's some things that are just going to make you up as an individual that we don't know and they don't factor into those calculations. If we've missed the mark, it's not going to be by much because we base those calculations on height, age, weight, activity levels, gender, all of those things. We know we've got those things right. Like we haven't fucked up your gender. We haven't fucked up your age. So we know for the most part we're very close to that number. So usually if it's not as effective as we want it to be, we adjust it by the tiniest bit and it kicks in, like the effective deficit kicks in very quickly from there. So what I'm getting at is if that was to happen in the first 4 weeks, we then adjust. We've got an 8-week window to absolutely kill it and keep progressing. And the other thing that I like to point out here is when you have that information, you have that information for life. You can say, I know that 2,000 calories is not an effective calorie deficit for me. I know anytime I want to pursue fat loss, it's 1,800, it's 1,700 or whatever. When you start to, or when you have enough adherence and consistency to gather that information, you've got that for life. And like I said, it's invaluable because as much as we can calculate as close as we can, We can never know for sure. So that information is priceless. You couldn't buy that information. You actually couldn't. You could hire the best coach in the world. You could join the best program in the world, and they could calculate as close as they possibly could with everything they know. But there's always going to be shit we don't know. So you could say to someone like, I'll give you $1 million to find the perfect calorie deficit for me. And they couldn't guarantee that they could do it. The only way you can get that information is by doing it, by nailing a certain intake and assessing what happens with your individual body. So that's why I say that information is invaluable, because you couldn't just buy it right now. You have to go through that process to find it. And the other thing to point out there is that is the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is we do hit it on day one. Like, you calculate those things and they are effective for you, and you, by week 4, you've seen an awesome result. And then people can be like, well, what if I was the person that didn't get the result? Well, it's 4 weeks of your life that you've then still got very valuable information from. You make a slight adjustment, you pivot a little bit. Not only do you have 8 weeks left in a program to implement that information and get a result, you can then take that information and apply it anytime you want to for the rest of your life. And this is where anyone who's been in an Eat Like Ruby program before will know that I always say to the girls, like, yes, we're here for 12 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever. I don't ever want you guys to think about it as like, I need to grind and push through for these 12 weeks. I want you guys to learn to take information and set yourselves up for life. I want my girls to know what their effective deficit is, what their maintenance is, what their surplus is. And I equally want them to know and feel confident and have the skill and the ability. And also just, like I said, it's the confidence and the enjoyment to just turn around and be like, you know what? I'm going to pursue a fat loss phase and I know how to do it. You know what? I'm going to chill with my nutrition for a few months and I feel fine doing it. Like, that is what I want people to get out of Eat Like Ruby. So I never want people to think like, fuck, I've only got 12 weeks. I have to get as good a result as I can. Absolutely, we want to get as good a result as we can in 12 weeks, but you can keep that momentum going. And that's why with the fat loss phase is going to have the fortnightly live calls. So anyone who's been in an Eat Like Ruby program with fortnightly live calls will know she goes off. I absolutely love fortnightly live calls. They're just the best thing. Anyone who's been in a masterclass will know, like, I have so much to say on these calls. And that is why I want to bring them into the fat loss phase, because, like I said, I've coached so many people through successful fat loss phases. I know what comes up in week 3. I know what we're feeling in week 5. I know what we're feeling 2 months in. And I want to create a space where I can speak about those things and you guys can be like, yes, oh my God, okay, she knows what I'm going through. This was her advice. This is the plan of attack. Awesome. Let's go for it. So I am going to try and wrap things up here. I feel like I could talk all day about this, but I will save that for the live calls. But really, the other thing I'll say about those live calls, I think we've got this on the info page for the fat loss phase, is almost think about it like a private podcast, guys. So obviously 27,000 downloads. You guys like the podcast. Imagine a private podcast where you know what I'm speaking to. I feel like there's almost an element with the podcast where you're like, oh, I wonder what she'll talk about this week and I wonder if it'll apply to me. If you're in the fat loss phase, believe it or not, I'm going to be talking about fat loss. It's going to apply to you. And the topics are a range of like, how do we eat out and pursue fat loss, which is a huge one. That'd probably be like a 6-hour call. Not really, but I have so much to say about that. Assessing progress, scale weight, diet breaks, moving away from fat loss, managing the festive season. Like, these are all included in that fat loss phase, because I don't want it to be like all those programs I'm talking about that are just dramatic, intense shit for 6 weeks and then see you later. I want to cover all of the aspects that are going to come up, navigate those things as we go, and have people come out in the festive season like, okay, I've learned so much and I'm feeling so good and I know how to manage my nutrition from here. Like I said, I feel like I went in so many directions today, but the real thing I wanted to get across is, A, if you want to join the Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase, I want you to do so as well. Get in there. I think it'd be cool. The other last little thing I will say on that note is, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, I am getting married at the end of the year. So obviously I am going to be in the fat loss phase as well. And I just think that brings such another cool element, because I'm going to be right there. I'm going to be grinding with you guys. I'm going to be having the highs, the lows, all of the things. And I just think it'll be so cool to speak in real time about that. Obviously, I come on the podcast and I speak about previous experiences or whatever, and I do masterclasses about previous experiences, but I think there's going to be a whole nother element where I'm going through it at the same time as you guys. I just think that's so cool. But like I always say, even if you never join Eat Like Ruby, you don't join the fat loss phase, whatever, I just want to get people thinking. I just want to get people to take all this on board, think, yep, some of that does apply to me. How am I going to take that information, pivot, adjust, whatever, and set myself up for a successful back half of 2023, successful 2024, and a successful life of nutrition and training, because like I've said so many times, we are going to be eating for the rest of our life. I dare you to commit to 12 weeks of learning how to do so. Mic drop. That end.